You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seatbelts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast. And this week, we're getting into something that kind of piggybacks off of what we talked about in our last episode.
Yep.
And that is the state of Magic organized play. And what we're going to talk about is where Magic organized play is now, where some of the other big games are at with organized play, and what we think could be taken from those systems, should be taken, what's good, what's bad, and how those can help improve Magic's organized play system. So with that, let's take it away.
Yep. So right now, up top, the big thing is what is the state of Magic OP? And I believe for everybody, it is a bit confusing. And how you stay on the quote train unquote is very difficult and kind of slapdash. So OP right now is basically anything that isn't an RCQ at the LGS level is run at regular rel. So that's basically just what we would call standard rules enforcement level before, now regular. There's an entire document about that called the JAR. It is fantastic if you ever want to have a really good time and see how FNMs and casual events should be handled. It's basically kitchen table rules. And after that, the RCQ system, and that's basically all we got. We have RCQs that lead to RCs, and then the RCs lead to PT invites. I believe they still give out PT invites on Moto, and I believe there are ways to qualify, sorry, not Moto, Arena, and there are ways to qualify for large events at Moto, and then Worlds happens. I do not know how you get to Worlds right now. I did, but it seems like no one really knows and nobody really cares immediately because they're all trying to figure out what's going on with the Pro Tour and how you stay on the Pro Tour. And if memory serves from the podcast I was listening to this week with Jarvis Yu, I believe, again, if you go 10-6, 9-7, 8-8 in 3 Pro Tours in a row, that is enough like QPs to stay on the Pro Tour. So if you drop below that in 3 Pro Tours in a row, you're going to fall off the train and have to re-queue for the Pro Tour. That's something that LSV had to do not too long ago, although he deferred his OTJ invite. He knew that was going to happen ahead of time. And that's why we see people kind of fall off pretty quickly. We have Nathan Stoyer looking like he will not be able to make it back to Worlds based on Pro Tour performance because winning Worlds wasn't enough to re-qualify for all Pro Tours in a year. We had Andrea Mengucci, winner of the first Arena Open, not on the Pro Tour for a while after it restarted up. And Andrea, I believe, is now queued for the Pro Tour after OTJ. And so Magic OP is just kind of as in flux as is the state of standard, it seems. It is very difficult to parse when you're looking into how you stay on the Pro Tour and get to Worlds, like I said. But if you're looking to play at the LGS, everything is fine and hunky-dory, and it creates this really weird rift between playing locally, which is effectively now casual, and playing outside your LGS, starting with RCQs. Even though your LGS might have one, just kind of consider that outside the LGS ecosystem, and it just kind of gives you this vision that OP is really muddy right now. As an LGS, you get to serve, I think we mentioned it's 2 RCQs a season.
Yep.
Right? So after that, you guys get to kind of wash your hands of OP and just host locals like you want, right?
Yeah. And, you know, it's a lot easier than it used to be. They basically hand you the weekends of this is when your RCQs can be. Pick one of the 2. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's pretty much, that's it. They reach out, they say, hey, it's RCQ season. Schedule yours. These are your dates. The end.
Yep.
And then we just get to do whatever.
And then I think aside from that, the other detail you get to choose is whether or not you want to run the RC in limited.
Yeah.
Or if you want to run it in the format of the RC, right, that you are qualifying people for.
Yeah. And generally, it's every store I know of does it for the format rather than limited because, I mean, nobody plays limited in stores anymore.
And it's not an RCQ format. It is a Pro
Yeah.
Tour format. So if you're trying to get to an RC, doing it via limited is a fine way to do it, especially if the limited format is deemed decent.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not a limited format, so why would you really address it as such, the RCQ?
Yeah.
Now, most other games that we've talked about, most other card games that are out there that have an OP system, you have some experience with. So we're just going to kind of go down a list.
Yeah.
We talked about it during the week in Discord, and you gave me a couple. And the first question I asked was, well, what is the Pokemon organized play system? And I was surprised to find out that Pokemon organized play in 2024 is almost the exact same as Pokemon organized play in the year of our Lord 1999, when it first started. OP first started in North America, which is effectively just Nats. Is it regionals to
regionals
nationals?
And Nats? Yep.
And then to Worlds, and that's it. Back in the day, it was like round robin at what they deemed Poke Centers, which were effectively just Toys R Us's and various video game outlets, and you just played round robin events,
whatever,
wherever. And I don't know how none of that translated to nationals. I don't think there was actually a qualifying system for nationals. You just kind of drove there and showed up.
Yep.
Now things are a little more fleshed out, but when it comes to the LGS, and I asked you this up top before we started, what does Pokemon organized play in the LGS actually look like? Is it just considered like Magic FNM?
So it's like Magic FNM, but Pokemon has actually done a really good job of working with LGSs to cultivate a new player base. Mm-hmm. So they encourage you to have a night that's for people to come out and learn and play more casually.
Play and trade and just kind of exist on their own, right?
Exactly, yeah. Okay. So they still have a very traditional, like, heyday of TCG way that they look at things. Yeah. And, you know, you've got obviously your standard format, and then Gym Leaders has come out, which is kind of like a community driven, like almost EDH style thing. Okay. And then there's also been some limited formats that have popped up with house rules. So you're starting to see this like community grassroots movement that can play into your organized play, but Pokemon Co. is very much, hey, if that's what works for you, go for it. If you want to have a night and you want to age restrict it, go for it. We have no problems with that. Okay. The only thing that they really care about is you're not serving alcohol, because it is fundamentally still a children's card game.
Yeah. You mentioned it, the age restriction at that during the nights, because they still have juniors and seniors worlds and like events at the higher levels of OP, correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so segmenting based on age at the LGS level still makes sense, because like I said, I do believe at least Worlds has a junior and a seniors division. So that segmentation is both representative at all levels of OP and can be kind of important to cultivating that like grassroots player base that you're talking about. Lorcana is the next one. We had some conversations externally about this. I've talked to some of my Magic locals about what's going on. My understanding of Lorcana OP really only comes from that really shady, hey, we're going to have a big event at the Miami International Airport like a month after the first set dropped, and the winner gets a case.
Yeah.
That was Lorcana OP. And after that, it's just been whatever Star City wants to do. And it's the same 8 white dudes just copied and pasted every time.
Yeah. And so they basically, when the game came out, they said, hey, we're going to wait to announce our organized play system until 2024.
Yep.
So then they announced their organized play system. And part of the announcement is that we are not starting our organized play system until winter of 2024 or spring of 2025.
Okay.
So at that point, the game will have been out for 2 years. Mm-hmm. That's a bad move.
Yeah.
The other bad move, and this is something I just like completely floors me. Their organized play system is best of 2, where game 2 counts for more points in tiebreakers. Because what they cited was, we think people don't want to play as long, and that this will be less draining on them. Anyone I knew that was excited for organized play for Lorcana quickly divested themselves of all of their Lorcana cards after that. That is not, to me, an organized play system, because again, there weren't even specifics yet. It was, this is how the format is going to work, and we're going to launch it in a year. Mm-hmm. That amount of opacity and obfuscation clearly was learned from Wizards of the Coast, but is not a way to have a good organized play system. It didn't say anything about how to qualify or anything. It was just, hey, we're going to have some regional events in the meantime, and that's it.
Do you know anything about what type of events serves that Stitch promo that's like $600 that all the like Star City grinders are pushing for?
Store championships.
Okay. So is that the same thing as kind of like game day / what they're doing now with store champs, where you could win the cool like was it Worm Coil and Collected Company, like the same thing?
Yep, exactly like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the big change for Lorcana came seemingly after just this deluge of data that basically pointed out the fact that play draw in game 1, or I guess play draw in general, was so like ridiculously important to the matchup.
Yeah.
That, or the game at hand, that if you were on the play, you would end up winning like over 50% of the time. I think it was close to
Absurd.
60 or maybe 65%.
Yeah.
And it seemed like a knee-jerk reaction to fix that was making rounds best of 2 or whatever it is. And yeah, it just seems really weird. But at the same time, we don't actually know what Lorcana OP is supposed to serve, or for the long-term viability of the game, what's going to happen in general. Because at this point, they're pumping out sets pretty quickly. Disney's made their money and they keep making their money. Mm-hmm. And nobody, whether it's Ravensburger or Disney, really needs to care about an OP system if the cards are just moving to to whom they need to.
Yeah.
And there's just this really big divide in the Lorcana player base. There's like people that enjoy the game, and then, like I said, those same 8 white dudes that keep winning Lorcana events at Star City that are pushing for OP. And it seems like they're just trying to serve both communities, but it's not working out too well yet. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in time. The next big one is One Piece, which you and I talked about this weekend when I appeared in St. Louis.
Yes.
And Bandai does regionals. Yep. And it's not segmented like Yu-Gi-Oh kind of did some stuff where it's like regions of the world. It's just like, so South America, so is it Central America? That was the event that you were at?
Yeah. Central America, South America, and then the States. Regionals are basically by region: Midwest, Southwest, Northwest, Northeast, Southeast. That's basically it.
Yep.
The really interesting thing about that is that they basically, they have, you just sign up on the app and it's a drop basically. Until they cap, you can sign up. Mm-hmm. Once it caps, you have to get on the waiting list. And then similar to Yu-Gi-Oh regionals, you'll have people show up on the wait list that are just hoping people don't show up. Mm-hmm. Because demand for these events is so big, people are literally just signing up regardless of whether if they know they can actually go or not. And the reason for that is their prize cards.
Yeah.
So One Piece did something that was brilliant, and Magic has kind of taken on, what they've been doing with like the Secret Lair Challenge, or more notably, Eternal Weekends, where top 8 of Legacy and Vintage each get a card that commemorates being top 8 of the event. So One Piece has characters from the show on the cards, and it is the exact same card as the one that appears in the set. The only difference is a little part of the card that says either winner of a regional, mm-hmm. top 4 of a regional, or top 8 of a regional. And everyone that participates in those events gets a participant card that commemorates participation in the regional or in the team event or whatever, because it does specify by event. Mm-hmm. And this costs them nothing. Literal basic nothing to do that. But some of these cards have gone for as much as $40,000 to $50,000. And they're only given out during one season or at one event. So it creates this scarcity and collectability to it. And that's why it's more likened to me to the Eternal Weekend promos than the Secret Lair Challenge promos, because those get given out more and more every event. Whereas those top 8 ponders and those top 8 brainstorms, there's only 8 of them. Or what is it, 24? North America, Asia, and Europe. But that's all there's going to be. And that alone has created such a huge demand for regionals, for 3-on-3 events, for, they call them treasure copes, which are just pop-up like Grand Prix style events, that are just amazing. And people come out in droves. And people will come depending where they're from. So in Mexico, for example, there were people that came up from Chile because they did well enough the last event that they got a prize card that they sold for enough to live for 6 months on the winnings of the card, so they could travel to the next one to try to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And it's created the ability for people to actually become professionals at the game just by fencing their prizes. And that's a huge ad for the game.
So what's at the top level of OP for One Piece right now? Do you know?
So there's nationals, kind of.
Okay.
But there's no pro tour. It's just regional events. Bandai, to their credit or discredit, has never been too terribly interested in making like a pro circuit with any of their games.
Yep.
And granted, some of that could have to do with their business model, which is basically to abandon a game after 2 years. Well, it's been more than that for One Piece, and they haven't abandoned it, and they're still continually releasing new content for it because the IP is so strong.
Mm-hmm.
So this may be the first one. Yeah, it's so rich. It may be the first one they do it for.
Okay.
But it's basically, yeah, they don't have that pro, like, top level. And they don't need it, really.
No, and that's fine. And this is one of the games that just kind of flies under the radar because, like we were talking about, my local scene, it does support One Piece, but not the same way that other games are supported.
Yeah.
So next on the list is Yu-Gi-Oh! And this is a game that's, for me, really interesting because I followed it really lightly. And by the time I stopped, the regionality problem hadn't been solved yet, where Konami said, and when I say regional, I mean to the globe. So think of the globe like you're peeling an orange. And certain regions, as you peel it, got certain cards, and they were written certain ways. So the APAC region's cards could actually function differently than European cards, than North American cards, etc. You couldn't play cards from outside your region, inside your region, and basically that was kind of the top echelon, was just regions, because the cards just didn't really mesh up. And my understanding of Yu-Gi-Oh! OP was there was the store level, which is fine, just run events, and then I can't remember the name of them. They felt kind of like Grand Prix, but a lot smaller, where Konami would put them on. They would invite vendors to the events. They would have very strict guidelines for dress code for vendors and staff, and they would be on the floor representative there so they could take care of any problem immediately. Yep. You could floor buy as a player if you wanted to. And as a vendor, you could sell no single card worth more than $100. But the workaround for that was if you wanted to sell...
Trade only.
I keep talking about card D. If you wanted to sell that card for market price, which is over $100, you can certainly price it and a piece of crap for $140. And that's 2 cards average to $70. And hey, that gets past the thing, but you got to bundle them when you buy them. Like, that was the last experience I had with Yu-Gi-Oh! OP. And so from there, it's just kind of been this dead zone. I never really knew anybody that played any more than just at the LGS level.
So they do still have the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series, which is the events you're describing.
The YCS, yeah.
Yeah, the YCS. They also have regionals, which are done at stores. Now, these are very interesting for a couple of reasons. As you said, the YCS has a certain requirement for you to be a vendor. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is also one of the few games that also has a hygiene policy in their tournament rules, which is very interesting because you know what the game does not have, and this is the biggest knock against its organized play. There is no comprehensive rules document in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! It does not exist. So, and this has caused issues for Worlds because cards are ruled to work certain ways, as you said, in Europe, certain ways in Southeast Asia, and certain ways in the US. So when you go to Worlds and you have a global staff judging the event, there can be disagreements between the staff on how cards work, which is obviously one of the worst things you can have for high-level play. Because now I'm in a top 8 for an event, and a European judge says the card works one way, and a Southeast Asian judge says it works another way, and they have to figure out how it works in this specific game, which does not hold true for mass play everywhere else. So that is an incredibly confusing thing about organized play. Now, regionals are something that you reach out to Konami and they give you the exact date of your regional. You do not get to pick it. They tell you what date you are going to have it if you would like to host it. And the reason for that is because they want their regionals spaced out far enough apart that they're not competing with each other,
And
which is actually,
sense.
that's a good thing. Yeah, exactly.
From a player and a staffing standpoint, you got to break it up.
Exactly. Now, the other thing is similar to One Piece. You will have people drive 4 to 5 hours for these regionals.
Yes.
Because this is an instance where now the Yu-Gi-Oh community cares so much about playmats, and this is where you get your regional playmats, your top eights, your winners, stuff like that. It's also often tied to set releases. So that the product, it's usually a lot of times they're within 2 to 3 weeks after a set release.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is now this store has its prize in the new set, which we want to move. So running this event is another way for us to move that product.
For players to acquire it, to sell sealed on-prem. Yep.
Exactly. Okay. And then buy the singles if they've already been traded in. And that's one of the ways that Konami secretly kind of does push along the secondary market in their game, even though they will, similar to Magic, never admit that they care about it. But they clearly do based on their print model. Now, the things from all of these that I think are the biggest takeaways are obviously Magic is not the worst because we have a best of 3, which makes the most sense. We have comprehensive rules, which, good Lord, if we did not have comprehensive rules, I cannot imagine what kind of anarchy would happen at events. That would be absurd.
It's insane. Yeah.
But there are clearly a lot of ways for them to improve. Being more transparent about events, letting people sign up for events in more obvious ways, making prizes that are more appealing to people that don't necessarily involve a cash prize. Granted, cash is king. I understand.
Yep.
But if you can run events for One Piece and get 500 to 2,000 people that are just there for a top 8 promo, you can certainly do that for Magic if you make the cards good enough. I mean, I can't remember what the last Ponder sold for, but I know the first one sold for like $25K.
Yeah. An example. So I judged a sealed Murders at Karlov Manor RCQ. Yeah, 2-slot. And we gave out an untold number of full art explorers. Everybody wound up with at least 2. And the top 8 got some number of expressive iterations. And then there was something else for either top 4, just top 4, or some breakout, because there's a 2-slotter. All non-foil, all full art, and given out in such quantity that there was more than enough to go around. I think everybody might have walked out with 4 explorers, because WotC always gives you more cards than you will ever give out for promos at the times they tell you to give them out. And so now you just have a dearth of product opening up into the market, as opposed to something like One Piece, where you restrict the top 8 promo to 8, the top 4 to 4, and now things kind of shrink in. When you do the general promo, it's restricted to the event because you're stamping it. And so that creates scarcity on that product, even though it's to the game a non-unique game piece. And to regionals, it's technically not a unique card, but what makes it unique is the stamp for the location and date. Right.
That's one of the things that was great was when they came out with the top 8 for game day. Because then all of a sudden, this is a store that I care about. The problem is, the only stores that everyone cares about are like Card Kingdom and Star City. None of the other ones carry much of a premium because nobody knows what they are, because it's centered around your LGS. Fun anecdotal story about that. Only 7 people showed up for the store champs where Archmage's Charm was given away at Star City. So they sent one back. So there are not 2 play sets of that card in existence. There are only 7.
Hell yeah. They did all right.
They did.
They tell you to do whatever you want with that card, if there are any extras. Generally, there's a destroy by date on that kind of product. And you deal with it.
Your problem now.
That's both funny and outstanding. So do you know anything about Fab OP before we kind of skip along to the next questions?
So Fab OP is very similar to the old PTQ system. Or what I have often referred to as the glory days of the Magic Pro Tour. You qualify at your store events. You go to their callings are what their Pro Tours are called. You can qualify for them at store events. You can qualify for them at Star Cities where they're held. They'll do last chance qualifiers. And you also qualify based on your performance, which is an ELO rating. So you can just queue by playing a
Right.
bunch and being really good at the game.
Yeah.
Which, again, back when your rating was a thing.
You got to specify. There were 2 times when you had rating. The first time we had rating.
The first time we had rating, yeah, I believe it was a 21 or 2200, automatically queued you for the Pro Tour. And you didn't have to do anything. You could literally just show up and boom, you were on the Pro Tour for Magic. And Fab has a similar system and is obviously, of all of the games that have come out pretty much since Magic's inception, the most focused on the competitive circuit.
Yeah.
They have made no qualms about they do not necessarily care about casual formats. They are here for competitive players who want to make money playing the game. And gameplay wise, it is very good. And the Pro Tour scene is very robust and very representative. It's actually, I wish we could go to that. And I know a number of Magic grinders have shifted over to Fab because they feel like it more properly incentivizes their time spent in the game.
Yep. I have a couple of Magic locals that did the same thing. There was a point in time, I think, one of them was talking about a couple of weeks ago, where they shifted over to Fab because there was something going on locally that they just didn't like with the Magic scene. They swapped over to Fab, did pretty well at some Star Cities, and then when things shifted locally, they went back to Magic, and they've just been grinding Legacy and Vintage. Yep. So they definitely dipped their toes in it. They enjoyed the game, but it just wasn't appealing enough for them. So they, for whatever reason, so they came back to Magic. But it seems like people still really do enjoy Fab. They enjoy the gameplay aspect of it. It does provide. So we've talked about a number of games. There's 2 of them outstanding. I don't think we know what's going on with Lorcana rotation and One Piece rotation. But we know Pokemon rotates. They have an idea of standard, and they kind of have an idea of, I think, if you want to put it in correct parlance, it would be like Legacy, and that's it. Vintage doesn't really exist because that would extend back into the WotC era, and that is just this bygone like vestige of the game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a non-rotating format or non-rotating game. They rotate based on bands, which is kind of what, from my understanding, Fab does, based on the conversations I had this week with some Discord members. Fab doesn't rotate. Your hero hits LL status, and the only time things change is if something comes on. Nothing has gone off, and I think they mentioned that there's policy that nothing will come off. They just kind of make similarly typed heroes, and this way the equipment and the supportive cards can still be used later on. It's not like Yu-Gi-Oh! Where things is just like, okay, if we're going to ban the engine to like synchros, well, get mucked all the other synchro cards. You can't just a wholly unplayable or XYZs, etc. Like that's not what happens. They try and keep the game moving, keep the cards relevant, and keep people playing the game in that way. So their entire deck isn't banned out from them. So they don't buy in a Splinter Twin, have it banned out, then buy in a Birthing Pod and have it banned out, or vice versa, whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
They try and keep the rest of that stuff relevant, which is also like really fucking
good design.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's just outstanding because it keeps people engaged with the game. You're never just entirely out a collection and have to be asked to start over again.
Yeah.
So as we went through, we kind of discussed and like pontificating on Fab, the best facets of each, kind of what we talked about. I think some of them are in the same era as Magic, which is just kind of like question mark, question mark, question mark. You're there. There's the idea of the regionals. It seems like Magic is, you got to qualify for the qualifier effectively, but some of that is also a personnel issue where there's just not enough space to bring in all these people to play these events and compete. So it's kind of like logistically, you got to funnel people down. So it does kind of make sense. Even in the PTQ era, we still had the funnel. Right?
Yeah, we did.
The PTQs were the funnel. They were just spaced out further apart, both in terms of time and distance, which also presented the pre-funnel funnel. If you couldn't afford it for one reason or another, you weren't going, which means you couldn't win that PTQ, which means you weren't going to the next PT. You had to wait for something closer, right? That funnel was there. But Magic is the only one, aside from Fab, that kind of goes all the way up like that. There are a lot of pieces of the Fab model that when you look at it, when you talked about it just now, you can see were pulled from Magic, OP, current, and historic. So those two really do parallel, and it seems like that's kind of the best way to do things. They're running in parallel right now. They're both kind of figuring out what they want to do. And Star City seems to own the majority of the high-profile Fab stuff, at least on the East Coast. And now they're going to own most of the high-profile Magic stuff on the East Coast as well. So you know what? Maybe we do get a change in Magic OP, or things start to feel similar between the two now that we have like all these events handled at all of these Star City events.
Yeah.
So for me, I think any best facets are going to come from Fab, aside from the One Piece promos, like you mentioned. I love that. But the one regionals I competed in, I didn't get a dedicated promo card at the time. We got token packs, which was just kind of like whatever, some double-sided stuff, and you see them very, very rarely in the wild because they came from gaming, etc.
Yep.
And they were bland enough. The promo cards that we got, and these are even rarer to find, are the gaming etc. promos for the Power 10 that just say Recall, Lotus, Sapphire, etc. Eventually, WotC C&D'd them for
Love
that.
those
So that's
proxies, though.
yeah. There you got an 11 pack, and one of the cards at random was a foil. You got all 10 and non-foil. So they became kind of the promo cards. They got a little bit of worth to them. But I've never really received a promo for playing in Estates. I'd never received another promo for a PTQ. Nothing like that. It was all whatever you won from those events, and then your name in the standings at the end.
Yep,
that
was it. Congratulations. Yeah. And maybe a photo, depending on the TO.
Exactly. Yeah. Like up in New England, when everything was being done around Boston, yeah, you were going to get that kind of stuff in New York City. Similarly, if you were in the Midwest somewhere, like kind of get mucked, I guess. But other than that, so then the last big question, and I think we've kind of both answered it and danced around a debate, is, what can Magic do to improve its OP system looking at other models? And for me, it's just being a lot clearer on how you do things and an understanding of how one maintains their ride on the Pro Tour train. Because when you have people that have demonstrated mastery at your game falling off for even doing well, but not well enough, like 2 or 3 times in a row, having to requalify, that seems a little dicey, especially when you're trying to build stories around individuals. The story from this Pro Tour was how Nathan Stoyer might not make it to the next one. That's not a good story to sell.
No.
They were not Jean-Emmanuel Depras, fervent champion, Javier Dominguez.
Yes.
He was 10th in this Pro Tour and 9th at the other one, and like top 8 the one before that. And he's like, I'm falling down the standings. This is terrible. Like, it was a joke at the time, but it could seriously be a problem if he continues to fall ever so slowly. Like, he has a card with his art on it. So I think he won Worlds for that at that point.
I think so, yeah.
It wasn't an invitational then.
No.
He has done incredibly well at the game. He could fall off the train immediately. Like, people that have won high-profile events didn't even make it to the next Pro Tour. They just weren't invited. This is what needs to be patched up. You don't need to see the same faces on the Pro Tour for decades in a row. LSV doesn't need to make it to every Pro Tour unless it's basically by his merit of doing well. But even then, if you're running like 9-6 or 9-7 or 10-6 until the end of time, that should effectively be enough. You should be able to take an L or 2 in a given year and not have to worry about the 3rd Pro Tour that year, the 4th Pro Tour that year. You should have been able to carry your points over from the previous year and have an amount of like credit behind you that pushes you forward. And I do understand that is ableist. That's like talking about privilege. How do you get new people on the Pro Tour? They keep adding people to the Pro Tour. This is like one of the biggest Pro Tours ever.
Yeah.
You keep, and like, do you not just want to grow the Pro Tour? Or do you want to be the same 8, 16, 24 people forever? Let Worlds be that. Let Worlds be the what do they call it? Not the small format event, like the event, the small attendance event.
Yeah.
Like, cool.
The limited, not in format, but in scope.
The top 24 performing players from the previous year, or whatever it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Bring them in. That should be a rotating cast. Like, the Pro Tours.
It reminds me of, I'm sure you remember before this last, or maybe it was the second to last redoing of the Pro Tour. If you were in the Hall of Fame, you automatically had an invite.
Yeah. That's
cool.
That's why Kai used to show up all the time.
Fine. You're in the Hall of Fame. You deserve that. They don't do that now, and they've made it harder for people to maintain being on the Pro Tour unless it's literally their full-time job, and it doesn't pay enough to be a full-time job.
That's also part of it too. Yeah, you can't just dedicate to this full-time, have to worry about falling off and try and make a living traveling around. Once a quarter, it is a big deal, but the amount of hours you've got to put into this game in between it's calculable, but it's close to incalculable. Like,
yeah.
So,
and I think it's difficult for people to stay on because the requirements are stringent.
Yeah.
But I look at it like this. If, you know, I don't have to be the Michael Jordan of Magic. You know, I don't have to be the greatest all the time. But if I'm the LeBron James of Magic and I'm 80% as bright as Jordan, but my flame burns for 20 years longer, shouldn't I also be in the conversation or be on the Pro Tour?
Yeah.
Because I've still shown excellence. I'm still top 16ing these events, top 32ing. I mean, I remember in the Grand Prix days, I think it was top 32 of certain Grand Prix because of attendance were enough to get you onto the next Pro Tour.
Yeah. Yeah, so you had that in between. Oh.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah, so for me, that would really be the last little bit I want to see, which is just cleaning up the invite system to the Pro Tours, not from the RC level, but from the Pro Tour level and the points you have to acquire to get there. Worlds is its own separate conversation. Yeah. I understand the competitiveness that goes into Worlds, but that's always been a showcase kind of format or event for me. So I don't really care how that has to happen. It doesn't matter. I would love it if they mixed the best players from across all facets of the game. So you had people coming in from Paper and from Arena and from Moto and trying
and limited and 60 card formats, sealed, whatever.
Yeah, and just bring people in like that and try and make that kind of event for a showcase style event.
That would be great.
But I'm more concerned about the Pro Tour because if you want people to be professionals at your game, and professional means you make a constant paycheck, then you got to figure this invite system out, and you can't have people who excel at your game falling off for one or two bad events in a row.
And then they're just done.
Yep, because this is a game of luck, and it is a game of skill. And sometimes you just open the worst sealed pool you will ever see at a Grand Prix, and you do not make it out of round 2. You know, stuff like that happens. You have to read your seat in a draft pod, and I maintain every draft pod has an 0-3 seat.
Yeah,
it's just the way it is. You draft the deck that your seat is supposed to, because those are the cards that are coming in front of you. They're the best cards that you are going to be seeing, and you might just be sitting in the 0-3 seat.
Yeah, and that's just the way it is.
Yep, and I think that kind of that level of randomness needs to be accounted for and needs to be buffered by something else for the Pro Tour.
Agreed.
Make it a livable and survivable thing to do. And before we spin this off into another episode, let's move into picks.
Yes, you start.
Yeah. So I am upcycling a pick you made April 4th of 2022 from episode 178, and that is Maskwood Nexus from Call Time. So this is not a sell call. We were just going back to take a look at Maskwood Nexus, because if you bought in then, you should have been able to turn it out for profit a while ago. Now, as of me taking my notes, Card Kingdom was buying 26 of these at $4 each, and they had 8 for resale at $12. They are currently buying 6 of these for $3.70. So, a bunch were shoved at Card Kingdom, and they still have 8 for $12. Cool. That's basically the retail price is basically locked in. On TCG Player, there were 200 unique listings for a market price of $9.33. We now have 211 listings with a slightly dipping market price at $9.18, and we are okay with that. Cool. When I added this to my notes, my list of specs in 2022, December 19th, Card Kingdom was buying 20 at 0.6 cents. And there were 297 listings on TCG Player for $2.82. So this has been sitting here for a while, and I've just kind of let it accrue value over time. I wanted to see some organic growth before we made any moves. I wanted to see what kind of reprints this was going to catch. And we're finally at a point now where we can take a look at this card and reevaluate it as another spec to buy back into again. So when we look at Maskwood Nexus, it's, I'll bring up the stocks graph so we can see the rise that it's on. This is an artifact that costs 4, and it reads creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. And then it has an activated ability, 3 colorless, tap, create a 2/2 blue shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. And the reminder text of Changeling is that it has all creature types. So cool. This feels itself basically. And when it comes to Commander on the whole, we're looking at typal synergies for this card and really nothing else. Because that's what you do. All creatures are all types, so giddy up. Now, on the whole in Commander, WotC doesn't need to, let me back up. This was in a standard set, right? So WotC doesn't need to put this into standard. They don't need to put this into a set that has a large amount of typal synergies to push cards. They can just give it a little bit of a wink and a nod. So in Call Time, there really wasn't a whole lot going on with creature types. We got a lot of weird god synergies. We got I can't remember which came first, Toski or Chatterfang, but we basically got a little bit of Squirrel Love in Call Time. These are the kind of the winks and nods that I'm talking about. We saw the price jump around Murders at Karlov Manor on Maskwood Nexus, and that is because of Voja, a card we've talked about before that has multiple creature type synergies printed on the card. It cares about, I believe, dogs and elves. Let me bring up Voja. Creatures were elves you control and wolves. So elves and wolves. And that's the bump we saw at MKM, where when we look at stocks, it basically was it wasn't plateauing, it was doing a little bit of movement. Then we hit MKM and it rockets up because Voja is a hell of a card. Over time, we're seeing WotC group together creature types to create larger synergies for things like party and outlaw style mechanics. And that can push a card like Maskwood Nexus, as well as cards like Conspiracy, which is the first version of this card, a black enchantment from Arcadian Masks, and Xenograph, which is a blue artifact from, I believe, New Phyrexia. These groupings can afford players a new way to engage with typal synergies and strategies in a similar wink and nod kind of way that we see with Voja. And what we got in OTJ is this grouping of creatures into outlaws. So we have like warlocks, which people have been clamoring for forever. Rogues double up with party, mercenaries, which a handful of cards are. And it just kind of like, it doesn't quite bring the room together. It just allows you to extend the outlaw synergies inside the set to Commander by just kind of playing whatever you want. It kind of makes this tribal deck that like Tomer from MTG Goldfish really likes, where he just plays like a bunch of changelings. And that's kind of what they do with both the party and outlaw mechanics. And that's not to say that we don't get obvious synergistic cards every now and again. Dominaria United brought us the new cycle of Kindred Lords. Lost Caverns of Ixalan gave us a number of new Merfolk editions, and even Modern Horizons 2, like I mentioned up top, brought us some new and also much needed reprints for Squirrels. So it shouldn't be too long, possibly Bloom Barrel, before we get some more overt cards for various typal synergies. So that's why we're upcycling this pick, because it continues to perform at a high level in casual Commander decks across the Kindred theme, which is an incredibly common and beloved theme. We've talked about Angels and Dragons kind of ruling the roost when it comes to a casual Commander. Like, you have so much to do in front of you already, and the more we come back to these very dedicated creature sets, the more possibility there is to extend these kind of typal synergies, typal interests into the player base, and we want to look at cards like Maskwood Nexus. Timeline, we did pick this you picked this in April 2022, and the market on it was $4.60, and we've since doubled up. Awesome. The Call Time variant sells approximately 10 copies a day, so we're not seeing an incredible amount of volume here, but it is moving. Market price is increasing like day after day as the price retraced this week when I was taking my notes. And what you'll notice is that so when you look at market price by sale over 24 hours, it's going to give you a very distinct picture versus like the gross market price that takes like 24 and some into consideration. So we were seeing like a 5 and 10 cent increase in market price over the last couple of days after I pointed out on stocks, that retrace coming into OTJ. Now, based on velocity, within 2 weeks, this card is over $10 again. So flipping back into the open market is going to be the easiest out within the next month or so. That's just projection based on sales velocity. Now, buy lists are lagging behind on the Call Time version in comparison to the Baldur's Gate version. Others are low on both, and Star City was actually buying both for a reasonable amount. I'm hesitant to say that sending to buy lists is out of the question, but I think we do need to see vendors sell through and be unable to restock at their current percentage before their systems adjust. Do we know if that's next month or 6 months from now? Not really. But if we see a reprint in Balloon Barrel, buy list will most likely be entirely out of the question for the call time version, and it'll just be a waiting game until the market kind of dries up on this. Reprint equity, it does seem like this should have really high reprint equity, but somehow we've dodged a number of reprints in both standard and commander sets. And the only reprint that we've got was in Commander Legends Baldur's Gate, which does seem odd, but I do guess the party mechanic needed some help, so they kind of threw it in there to tie it together, like I mentioned before. As such, you'd think they'd re-up in OTJ to help bring together the soup that is the outlaw grouping of creatures, but again, we dodged it. So I think we're actually pretty safe until we see a dedicated Typal Commander product again. That could be Modern Horizons 3 or Balloon Barrel if one or the other lean into Typal a bit harder than anticipated. And what I mean by that is we don't get some like wink and nod kind of stuff. We get some very like overt, hey, we're pushing tribal synergies in standard. So we want tribal synergies or Typal synergies in Commander as well. And we're going to put it in that product. Here you go.
Yeah, like Elvish Archdruid type printings,
kind of
like
stuff.
that kind of thing leaning into it.
Exactly. Dominaria United, similarly, we got all those Kindred Lords, but no real support for them in the set.
Yeah.
They just kind of gave us something new, like we talked about with Leaf Crown Visionary a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Then the last thing I want to note is by quantity, I did buy in and flip back out. So I think I picked up about a dozen the last time, and I'd be happy to do it again to re-up over time. Or re-out over time. I think this card, like, always has legs because, like I mentioned, Typal is one of the most popular themes in Commander when you just start adding, like, running the numbers, like how many dragon stacks, how many angels, goblins shortly after that, zombies, dinosaurs, etc., cats and dogs, whatever you want. It's all out there. It's all Typal. It all binds the room together. In some strategies, this goes a little bit harder than others. In Squirrels, I do believe this goes infinite. It's a 3-card combo. I'd have to re-verify.
Yeah, I think so.
But, easy peasy lemon squeezy on that one. And I don't think this is a bad card to just continue to keep in your binder either. You will have locals that want this because, like I mentioned, there are so many tribes that people have been playing since the beginning of this format that you're just going to find somebody who wants this.
Yeah, I think the card's great. When I originally picked it last year before, whenever, I loved it. I think it's great because tribal synergies are something that we routinely visit. Mm-hmm. And there, at this point, are so many tribal payoff cards that it's hard to decide which one they're going to reprint, which makes this less likely to see a reprint in my eyes.
Okay.
And I think that's, like you said, unless there's some real hard pushes for Typal stuff in Commander product, I just don't see it happening. And I don't think Gloomburrow's the place that it's going to happen. Maybe MH3 if it's in a Commander product, but that would be it.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine it would be in the main, but I think the Nexus was meant to be more relatable to the creatures of the forest. So there's on call time, so there's opportunity for it. But yeah, it's not difficult to imagine. Just kind of weird. So
yeah, it's not like it's not really plane specific, but it's kind of plane specific.
Yeah. On the other hand, you got a creature this time.
I do. It's a green EDH card, which is more of your realm. So I'm stepping out of my comfort zone with this one, and this is from the Big Score actually. And it is Bristlebud Farmer, Outlaws of Thunder Junction.
Bristlebud.
It is, 2 green and 2. Trample, when he enters the battlefield, create 2 food tokens on a 5/5 body. And, this is the important part, whenever Bristlebud Farmer attacks, you may sacrifice a food. If you do, mill 3 cards. You may put a permanent card from among them into your hand. So, this card, clearly just a casual EDH card. There's not much else to it. We're going to get more food synergies that this is going to play into.
Yep.
The really interesting thing about this card is when you look at the sales data, we're selling about 20 copies a day, which seems good. It's also from the big score, which means it's not going to be in every pack. It's a lower print run.
Mm-hmm.
But the really interesting thing is when you look at the listings on TCG Player, there are currently 305 listings. There are 19 with 4 or more. That's it. Out of 305 listings, there are 19 with 4 or more copies. So if we're selling at 20 copies a day, we're looking at inside of 2 weeks exhausting quantity, which we know is not quite what's going to happen. It'll get opened, it'll get moved, so on, so on. But this card stays at $1 for a very long time before it eventually hits a $10 price point on page 31. Now, I'm not saying this is going to be a $10 card, but I have every belief that this is a $5 card. And based on our current velocity, we're looking at about, realistically, with quantities getting reloaded, 3-4 weeks before we could hit that. Now, I think it's a little bit longer. I think we may be looking at closer to 2 to 3 months. That's if this finds a home. But at $1, I'm willing to take that risk. I've got about 10 to 15 copies myself right now. That's about what I'm comfortable with because at the price point, I figured I'd go a little bit harder. Mm-hmm. Now, this is 1000% a casual EDH card. It is a big, dumb green creature that has kind of soft reanimation shenanigans, which is something that we've seen green lean more into from a design perspective. So this kind of slides into Sidisi almost, like that kind of synergy of that kind of strategy is what you're looking for. If you want to just tutor for some big dumb dude and put him into your graveyard and get him back, this is the place to do it. Not to mention you're in green, so you have an unlimited way of making food. Yeah. There are so many cards that can synergize with this, and it's not just that. It's also pretty above rate. Just a 5/5 Trampler for 4 on its own is good enough. But there have been some Golgari mid-range lists popping up in Standard lately that this could maybe eventually find a home in if the metagame slows down a little bit. Not to mention, it does have 2 green pips if Devotion ever becomes a thing in Pioneer. This is a card that when I see it, I look at it, and I see the velocity. I think it's just a home away from being a real card, from having a real value of around $5 to $7. So I just wanted to call it out because this is kind of a unique spot, because the big score being a supplemental set that takes place of your extended arts, it's kind of got a strange pull rate attached to it that we haven't seen recently. So this may be the rare instance of a card in a standard set that has a low print run, or at least low visibility and low population out there in the wild, because there's no huge bangers in the big score that are going to make people continually open this like Sheoldred. Mm-hmm. You're not chasing that lottery card hit. And I think this card has the potential to be that slow riser, or not so slow riser, as the case may be, until it eventually hits that $5 point, and all of a sudden you look on the EDH rec, and it's in like 14% of decks that it's eligible to be in. So figured I'd point it out. It's not the most scientific one, but it's weird for me to see something with this kind of velocity in a standard set on what is kind of a short print, I would say, that has this quantity without drying up. So I wanted to point it out as kind of an anomaly in the market.
This is an interesting card. I'm taking a look at it on rec, and the decks it goes with are all over the place. The one thing I don't see is Academy Manufactor here. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. I see it. There it is. So I was kind of worried. So I'm looking at the new commanders are obviously from OTJ because they all came out in the new set. And the number 1 played commander out of this one is Yuma Proud Protector, which basically just leans into the mill aspect of it, which is fine, I guess. Then there's another commander that gives plants and other plants and tree folk you control +2/+0. That's it. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, return target plant to your graveyard. So that's kind of whatever. That Nea commander is a little weird, but it's like Avenger of Zendikar, yippee. We pump up the plants.
Yeah.
After that, the top 5 commanders with this card, and this is how limited in scope people have been in regards to, it seems like, building with some of the ancillary stuff from this, are all food themed. And I don't mean that in like a, oh, haha, cheeky, this is what the card does. I know, one is literally Guillaume Master Chef. Like, and then you have 3 pairings of hobbits.
Yep.
Like, who are all like, and it doesn't matter that all the hobbits reference food in some way, shape, or form on the cards. Like, even Merry and Pippin, that's what a hobbit is. It's just a walking, like, garbage disposal.
Yep.
And there's only one commander from Wilds of Eldraine on here. Greta Sweet Tooth Scourge, which doesn't do a whole lot. It just makes food tokens each time it's cast, so it's kind of like whatever. But that's where people are right now on this card. So to a lot of your point, like, people either aren't finding this card or aren't working with this card, but the moment they do and they step out of this like goofy little shadow that they're operating in, this goofy little space, and start playing this in like realistic decks, and like it doesn't lean into the combo with Academy Manufacturer, but it does give you something to do with food while you're in like the waiting room to combo off.
Yep.
Dumping it into your graveyard makes it like just as accessible when you're playing green and black as when it's inside your deck when you're playing green and black. It's just an extension of your library in your hand, except it's face up. It might be so like there's nothing bad about this card. It's just how you want to use it. Some people might see it as being limited. It only mills 3 cards. It only does it when it attacks, etc., etc. But it's not very difficult to operate with. It's really good in at least inside OTJ Limited. I opened this in my sealed pool and it was really good. 5/5 really for 4 is above rate with trample even. I mean, it's a mythic, so yeah, it's got to be. All said and told, though, this is a card that I honestly thought did not drop down to $1. I thought it was maintaining its price tag from a release weekend of close to $5. So this is honestly surprising to me, and I agree with the valuation on this card. I just don't know how long it's going to take to get there, like you said.
Yeah.
Right? There's everything to like about this card, especially the longer we play this game and the more silly synergies we get with both plants and druids, the better. Druids are a casual type where I think... Boy, I'm not going to remember this one properly. So Onslaught has a cycle of cards, and we looked at Skirk Fire Marshal, where you can tap some number of goblins and deal
Voice of the Woods. It made a 7/7 elemental.
I think there's another one, maybe from later on then, where you tap and you start milling people.
Yes, there is.
And you mill. I'm hoping it's druids and not dryads, so I might be wrong about this one.
I think it's druids, but yeah.
So that could be an option as well for that kind of stuff. We'd get a lot of plant support, oddly. So that new commander might actually play into this. But all said and told, I think this is a pretty decent sleeper card from Big, because there are a lot of other cards that are getting a lot more attention than this. Because hey, look, it's another GT. It's got to be just as broken as the first one, you know. That kind of stuff. Or it's Simulacrum Synthesizer or whatever, right? A bunch of $40 cards sitting in big score while there's stuff like this on the other end of the spectrum, or the other end of the shelf, basically, that has a lot of playability to it that people seem to be overlooking right now.
Yep.
And I like the call out on this. I like investigating the big score for picks. And I like cards like this that do a little more than you think they might. So all in all, I like it.
Thank you.
No problem. Anything about OP your picks before we cut out?
Nope.
All right. So for at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube, I am at Halt. I am Reptar. You are
At Damon_Thurston.
And we'll see you next week.